This video is going to be an overview of hormones in general, how they work, and the next video will be an overview of the hormone producing regions of the body. And so your body has 100 trillion cells, and obviously actions have to be coordinated, so there has to be a boss. And so here, obviously, here's a part of the brain which is sending commands to body parts to move. So clearly, the nervous system is one of the systems of coordination and control. But there's more than one. And so in general, you can think that your body has two bosses. The nervous system is one. And when we look at these nervous responses, notice that they're fast. All right, so if you want a nervous response, there it is. And so that was fast. However, it's also over quickly. So it's rapid but brief. So, I try to make this a little more dramatic in my classes, and I say, oh, and if you're waiting to see a nervous response, here it goes, it's over. All right, so it was rapid, but it was brief. It also has the potential to be very, very specific. So for example, if you were looking at something and then you shifted your focus just a little bit, out of this huge body that you have with so many cells, the number of muscle cells which contracted in your eyes to move your focus, just slightly, I don't know, was that 3, 5 muscle cells? It's incredible out of 100 trillion cells that you can send commands which are so specific. So your nervous system is in charge of responses which in general are fast, brief, and can be very specific. However, there's also another system of coordination and control, the endocrine system. So we have endocrine glands, which also send commands and are also coordinating the actions of systems of the body. Now, in my classes, I would say, all right, everyone, let's practice one of these endocrine responses. I'd like everyone to make more urine. 1, 2, 3, go. Did it work? Well, it will. But endocrine responses are slower, but more longer lasting. And so they don't start as quickly, nor do they end as suddenly. They tend to be longer lasting. Now they are specific, but many of them are less specific than nervous responses. So for example, after a meal, insulin is certainly sending commands to absorb glucose, but we can't say absorb glucose from, say, our left elbow only. And so many of the endocrine responses are, in general, less specific than the nervous system responses. So your body has two systems of coordination and control. This topic is on endocrine glands. Now, a student would then need to remember, there are different kinds of glands. Remember, there are exocrine glands. Exocrine glands are making products which are leaving the body. All right, so sweat leaves the body, milk leaves the body. But then again, mucus and nasal secretions and digestive enzymes, technically they leave the body because the lumen of the digestive tract, that space in the middle of the digestive tract, technically isn't inside you. All right, now I know this is philosophical, but if you think of a donut, is the hole in the middle of the donut part of the donut? Well, we would argue no, that's a hole in the middle of the donut. Well, in the same way, the tube of the digestive tract which goes through our body, if you eat sawdust, it technically never really goes into your body. It just passes through the lumen of the GI tract, the hole in the middle of the donut, if you will. And so then the exocrine secretions which go into that lumen, pancreatic secretions, saliva, bile, gastric juices, etc., they are technically leaving the body. So exocrine glands are making products which leave the body and typically travel through tubes or ducts. Now, there are unicellular mucus glands, but the multicellular exocrine glands, their products leave the body through a tube or duct. So there are sweat glands, there are sweat ducts. There is the parotid salivary gland, there is the parotid duct, there are bile ducts, there is the pancreatic duct, etc. That's not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about the endocrine glands. They do not make products which leave the body. Rather, they're making signals which stay in the body. And their products do not travel through tubes or ducts. So these are the ductless glands. So while exocrine and endocrine glands share some features, like they both come from epithelia, for example, Endocrine glands are making signals known as hormones that are traveling within the body, not leaving the body, and they do not travel through ducts. Now, it's very easy not to be impressed by the endocrine system. Because if you ask, well, what are the organs of the endocrine system? There's a pituitary gland, the size of a pea. There's the thyroid gland, the parathyroid glands, those little nodules. There's the adrenal gland. So there's a couple of these little glands that are making hormones, okay? And so all in all, that doesn't seem to be a whole lot. But then if you ask, well, where are hormones being made? Well, not just in these tiny little glands. White blood cells make hormones. Fat makes hormones. Your skin makes hormones. The heart makes hormones. So we have hormones like ANP, the atrial natriuretic peptide, TPA made by the heart. The stomach makes hormones like gastrin. The small intestine makes hormones like CCK, etc. Parts of the brain make hormones. And so the endocrine system, if we're talking about those hormone-making areas of the body, is much larger than we typically think of. So for example, in this animation, let's imagine this is a gland. Every cell here is making a hormone. Say this is the pituitary or the thyroid gland. So making hormones is its main job. However, now let's imagine, say, this scenario. Let's imagine this is the heart or the skin or the kidney or the stomach or the small intestine, where most of the cells have one job, but here's a cell that's making hormones. Is making hormones the primary job of this organ? No, it is not. But does this organ make hormones? Yes, it does. And so therefore, the endocrine system not only includes a handful of these glands where making hormones is their main job, it also then includes endocrine tissues in other organs. So, the heart makes hormones. It's not a gland, but it does make hormones. The kidneys make hormones. They're not a gland, but nevertheless, they do make hormones, etc. So that being said, the endocrine system is a bit bigger than many people realize. All right. So a hormone is a chemical signal. So here, this triangle, it's a chemical that came from one place, and it's going to cause this cell to change, for example, to differentiate. Well, what is a hormone? In my classes, I try to be a little dramatic. So at this point in the lecture, when just students are starting to fall asleep, I yell, "Stop!" as loud, and everyone, jerks up. That was obviously a signal, and they responded. If I were to say, now you try to leave, the college, and I jump in front of your car and I do this, that's a signal. You reach a red octagon on your way home. That's a signal. You reach a red light. That's a signal. What do these signals have in common? Nothing, other than the fact that you recognize it as a signal. So if you recognize it as a signal, then it's a signal. And it doesn't matter that me screaming at you, me waving my hands, red octagons, red lights, that they don't have much in common. You recognize it as a signal, so it's a signal. What do cells recognize as signals? Well, it turns out a bunch of things. So when you're done eating your lunch, all right, you've had some proteins, and these proteins are broken into amino acids. It turns out that some of these amino acids can then be tweaked and then converted into hormones. So histidine, the amino acid, can be converted into histamine. Tryptophan can be converted into serotonin. Tyrosine can be converted into thyroid hormones like thyroxine. And so there are a variety of hormones which are modified amino acids. So you eat protein, you break them into amino acids. The amino acids, or a product of theirs, becomes a hormone. Some hormones are modified amino acids. Some hormones are chains of amino acids. So one amino acid is stuck to another, which is stuck to another, which is stuck to another. And the chain of amino acids, that's the signal, that's the hormones. Some hormones are short chains. So for example, oxytocin and vasopressin, or ADH, they are 9 amino acids long. Insulin is 191 amino acids long. Thyroid stimulating hormone is a couple thousand. And so chains of amino acids can be hormones, short chains, medium chains, and long chains can be hormones. But there's more. One of the things I do in my classes is, let's just add a little drama. I say, ooh, you know what? I'm not sure I'm allowed to do this, privacy laws and all, but let me just ask, is anyone on steroids? Does anyone have like steroids in your blood right now? And everyone looks sheepish and, no one raises their hand. And then I say, all right, well then stop. And everyone go to the hospital now because you're in trouble. And then I realize when people ask, are you on steroids? I know they're referring to a specific class of steroids. But steroid is a lipid which has a specific chemical structure based on this ring structure here. Cholesterol is a steroid. It is the most common steroid in the world. It is an essential component of all cell membranes. And so cholesterol, this steroid, is an essential molecule. You obviously have cholesterol because you make cell membranes. It's an essential part of your body. But then from that, we can take cholesterol and change it into other things. So estradiol, that's the major estrogen. So estrogen is a steroid. Testosterone, with this ketone right there, that is a steroid. Cortisone, aldosterone, these are steroids. And so some hormones like estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, etc., are not amino acids or chains of amino acids, but rather they are modifications of steroids, which are lipids. And then finally, we can take some fatty acids and we can change them as well and make them into hormones. And so I ask my students, has anyone ever taken medications for your eicosanoids? Like your leukotrienes and prostaglandins. Anyone take any medications for those? No one raises their hand. And I say, wait, no one's ever taken aspirin or Tylenol or Midol? And then, they realize, oh, yes, I have. So you can make a signaling molecule out of a fatty acid. So here's a fatty acid. And we give different fatty acids names, like there's linoleic acid, arachidonic acid, etc. And we could look at where the double bonds are. And we can count where the double bonds are. And then we can focus on how close they are to the end. And so we can say, here's an omega-3 fatty acid, an omega-6 fatty acid, based on where the double bond occurs. So if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's where the double bond, you're an omega-6. If you count 1, 2, 3, there you're an omega-3 fatty acid. All right, and so different fatty acids have different positions of their double bonds, and we can make these into signals. It turns out that some of these signals are, say, pro-inflammatory, can be involved in fever, can be involved in pain, and others can be converted into hormones which are anti-inflammatory. Now, even though we don't talk about these all this much, it turns out that almost every cell of the body can either make and or respond to these eicosanoid local hormones. So fatty acids as signals are something that virtually all cells respond to. And some of our most common medications are medications which affect pain and fever and inflammation. So we are constantly taking medications which affect signaling molecules. And it turns out that what we eat, therefore, can have an effect on our health. If you're eating a lot of the leukotrienes, which are easily converted into pro-inflammatory signals, then you have more inflammation that's going on in your body. And then inflammation can be a risk factor for heart disease, for asthma, and other things. So if you're getting your fatty acids from, say, beef or chicken, then you're more likely to be promoting more inflammation in your body, which could lead to worse health outcomes. If you're getting more fatty acids from, say, fish and shellfish, or if you're, supplementing your fatty acids, then you're making more, you're absorbing more fatty acids, which are easily converted into anti-inflammatory signals, which will then better your health outcomes. So this is perhaps a topic for later when we talk about diet. But big picture is fatty acids can be signals as well. And so just like you can respond to a variety of signals, so too can your so too can your cells. So your cells can respond to modified amino acids, chains of amino acids, steroids, which are modified, forms of cholesterol, and then also modified fatty acids, eicosanoids, and this would include many of the signals which immune cells use, such as the interleukins. Okay, how do hormones work? So for example, there's a gland, the pituitary gland, which makes the FSH hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, which is meant to send a signal to the gonads. But because the signal is put into the blood, here's a signal for the gonads to start gametogenesis, which goes all over the body. For example, it reaches the muscles of your tongue. What does FSH do when it reaches your tongue? And the answer is nothing. So why does FSH, let's imagine this is the triangle, have an effect on the gonads, but not on the tongue? Well, not only do we have signals, but we have receptors for signals. In a classroom, I'll say, like, imagine we shut the door. We imagine there's smoke in the hallway. Well, we don't know that if we don't have a smoke detector. If there's a smoke detector, then when there's smoke in the hallway, it will relay something inside the room, like a flashing light or something. But without that smoke detector, there could be smoke in the hallway, and we don't know. In the same way, hormones interact with receptors, which are usually on the cell membrane. And so here we have, say, the green hormone is FSH. FSH does reach the cells of the tongue. But look, the cells of the tongue do not have green receptors on their cell membranes. So without those FSH receptors, the cells of the tongue don't know that FSH was ever present, and they don't respond to FSH. But here, the cells of the gonads do have receptors for FSH. When FSH binds the receptor, that causes a change inside the cell. Now here's a red hormone. Notice that the cell of the gonad doesn't have a receptor for the red hormone, but say maybe the muscle cells in the tongue do. And so each of these cells was able to respond to a specific hormone, all right? And the reason is that hormones react with receptors. So this is what we call a target cell for FSH because it makes receptors for FSH. FSH affects this target cell because the target cell makes FSH receptors. This cell was a target cell for the red hormone. Say that's thyroxine. Well, actually, that would be inside the cell membrane. I'm sorry. Maybe insulin because it has receptors for insulin. And so hormones will only affect specific cells of the body, which we call target cells, because target cells make receptors for that hormone. In my classes, if you play this video, it's a little silly, and if you wonder how we use this, well, right now in the background is playing Ode to Joy. And what I have my class do is I split them into 4 groups. And I say, each of you, like, this is your cell, this is your cell, this is your cell, this is your cell, row 1, row 2, row 3. And when hormones are binding this receptor, I want you to hum along with the Ode to Joy. All right. And so as the Ode to Joy is playing, so that row is humming, but only that row. Now, notice that the hormones are affecting all cells. The hormones are in the blood. They're affecting they're reaching all of the cells, but only one of the cells is responding. The only cells which respond to the hormone are the target cells, which are making receptors for that hormone. And so each of the rows then, they respond, one row responds, to the hormone binding this cell. One row responds to the hormone binding this cell. So even though the hormones are in the blood and potentially reaching all cells, hormones are specific. Hormones will only affect specific cells of the body which make receptors for that hormone. Now, while most hormones are on the cell membrane, some hormones are actually in the cytoplasm, like hormones for estrogen, testosterone, and the thyroid hormones and the steroid hormones. And so that's how hormones only act on specific target cells. How do hormones work? Well, there's two main ways. Those which have their receptors on the cell membrane, they primarily work through what are called second messenger systems. So here's the hormone, and it wants to affect this cell. The effect that it wants to have on the cell is it wants the cell to turn all of these green molecules yellow. And there's a lot of these molecules. Let's say, we want to make glucose, for example. Well, here's the hormone, the first messenger. And notice what happens. It binds to a receptor, but that's it. It's going to stay here and then eventually be degraded. It never comes into the cell. So how will this hormone cause changes inside the cell if it never comes into the cell? And the answer is the hormone was the first messenger, but this hormone, let's say it binds a G protein coupled receptor. The G protein coupled receptor then activates G proteins. Then, that activates, say, molecules of adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase will turn ATP into cyclic AMP on the inside of the cell. Well, now notice that there's going to be molecules of, these yellow triangles inside the cell. Now, a lot of them potentially, because maybe one of these could activate 10 of these. And maybe one of each of these 10 could activate 10 of those. And then each of these, could activate 10 of these, etc. So now we have a lot of these yellow triangles going around. The yellow triangle on the inside of the cell, that's what's called the second messenger. So here's cyclic AMP running around as a second messenger. And the second messenger inside the cell can therefore activate a lot of molecules inside the cell. So notice that even though the hormone didn't come into the cell, it's having an effect inside the cell. These green molecules are turning yellow, but we're making use of what's called a second messenger on the inside of the cell. And notice then the effect. Look at all the molecules which have turned yellow. So even though this one hormone didn't come into the cell, it did affect the interior of the cell, and it had a big effect. If this hormone had come in, this hormone would not have been able to run around to each of these molecules. But by acting on second messengers, this hormone has amplified its message. A little hormone has gone a long way. So most hormones stay on the outside of the cell. So here's a hormone, and it then is going to stay bound to its receptor. Say it's a G protein coupled receptors, but the G protein coupled receptors activate multiple G proteins, which are going to activate, multiple adenylate cyclases, which then, activate cyclic AMPs, etc. So a little hormone goes a long way. This one molecule is going to end up amplifying the message. Now, I give some more details about common second messengers. So cyclic AMP will return ATP into cyclic AMP. That's a common second messenger. And so if you were, understanding the body in a molecular way, because these second messenger systems are commonly used, say insulin, and FSH are different hormones, but nevertheless, they could use the same second messenger system. Then there's another common second messenger system, inositol 1,4,5 triphosphate is another common second messenger system. So, this is probably beyond, an introductory class, but once again, because, a whole diversity of different hormones activate cells by second messengers, and there's only a couple second messenger systems that, understanding, a little bit here goes a long way. Calcium is often used. And so some of these, if we have endoplasmic reticulum and calcium is stored in the endoplasmic reticulum, then the second messenger here, that inositol triphosphate, can now open channels which allow calcium then to be released. So most hormones function through second messenger systems. And once again, I go into a little more detail on some of the more common second messenger systems. Cyclic AMP is a very common second messenger system, for example. And then I also, mention that many of the receptors that a hormone might bind to are then also enzymes, which then start this cascade off. So here is a hormone binding to a receptor known as a tyrosine kinase, and then it in the cytoplasm will then make changes that will end up phosphorylating enzymes throughout the cell. Okay, and so most hormones work through what are called second messengers. There's one exception, and that's most seen in the steroid and the thyroid hormones. So for example, I preface this in class by asking, think of an individual prior to puberty and after puberty. So cells have done different things in that time. So as we go from before puberty to after puberty, cells have changed. They're now making different proteins, etc. Why? Because they have the same genes. A cell's genes don't change during puberty. The same genes are present, but now it's using different expressing different genes. And then that's the key. It's not only a question of which genes you have, but which genes you are using, which genes you are expressing. So cells can keep the same genes, but change which they are using, which they are expressing. So cells can be expressing different proteins after puberty than before puberty. How is this possible? Well, some receptors are not on the cell membrane, they're, say, in the cytoplasm. And when we make estrogen or testosterone, the estrogen and testosterone comes through the cell membrane because these are nonpolar lipids. They bind to receptors inside the cell, and then they go inside the nucleus where they then bind to DNA. So when we make estrogen or testosterone, and both men and women make both, these hormones bind to receptors and then stick to DNA. The fact that the hormone and its receptor have stuck to DNA then changes which genes are on. So now different genes will be transcribed. They will be turned on that previously weren't as a result of having the hormones and their receptors bind there, and thus the cell will change. So this is a second way that hormones can function. Instead of using second messengers on the cell membrane, they can actually come inside the cell where they meet cytoplasmic receptors, bind to DNA, and then turn on genes. Okay. The first part of this chapter, is essentially just kind of, what are hormones and how do they work? And I just have a couple final notes on that. First off, we're familiar with nervous system reflexes. The nervous system can have simple reflexes like a stretch reflex, like you get hit in the knee with a hammer in a doctor's office, and you extend your leg. So there was a stimulus, one neuron came in, it synapsed with another neuron, a motor neuron that goes out, you contract your knee. That was a simple nervous reflex. Some nervous reflexes are far more complex, like so when we walk or swim or play a musical instrument. That involves reflexes, but these are far more complex. So neural reflexes, they can be simple, but then they can be far more complex, involving lots of neurons, different parts of the brain, etc. In the same way, endocrine responses can be simple, all right? So, we can want to maybe activate a T helper cell. And so the macrophage, which is presenting the antigen, makes interleukin. This activates the T helper cell. So good. So we had just two cells, one hormone made, and we made the change we wanted. That was an endocrine reflex, but that was rather simple. In the same way, there can be far more complex endocrine reflexes. So estrogen can reach the brain. where it affects the amount of gonadotropin releasing hormone made by the hypothalamus, which then affects the amount of FSH made by the anterior pituitary, which then goes to the gonad, which causes estrogen to be made. So there can be many hormones. So maybe one hormone goes to the hypothalamus, it makes a hormone that goes to the pituitary, which makes a hormone that goes to the thyroid, which makes a hormone that goes out throughout the body, etc. So there are simple endocrine reflexes. There are complex endocrine reflexes. Now, certain hormones we've heard of, like estrogen or maybe growth hormone. Very often these are circulating hormones, which are made in one gland and travel a great distance. So insulin is made in the pancreas, but it has effects all over the body. The thyroid hormones, which keep us warm, like thyroxine, go all over the body. Growth hormone goes all over the body. These are circulating hormones. However, some hormones are now making more locally acting signals. All right, so some cells of the thymus gland might make hormones which then stay in the thymus. Notice here in the ovary as a follicle develops, there were signals being made which are just affecting neighboring follicles, so that all follicles don't develop in the same menstrual cycle, so that a woman has 1 month where she's fertile and then infertile for the rest of her life. So as one follicle begins developing, it will actually inhibit neighboring follicles. This is a locally acting hormone. So some hormones, such as those in the bone marrow, cytokines, which are promoting the differentiation of white blood cells, these are locally acting hormones, which are called paracrine hormones, right? And there's a lot of these. So for example, when we consider the follicle developing in the ovary, the oocyte makes signals which go to the granulosa cells, and then there are cells of the theca interna and externa. So there's all of these different layers, and these cells signal each other. So these are known as paracrine hormones. And then we also then have autocrine hormones, where a cell will make a signal which affects itself. Now, sometimes this is part of normal physiology, but this could also then be involved in a cancer, where abnormal cancer cells might actually make autocrine hormones, which then affect themselves and promote their own growth. And so hormones can not include not only the circulating hormones, which are made in glands and travel a great distance to affect target cells far away, but also locally acting paracrine hormones, where a cell makes a signal which affects their neighbor. And then there are even autocrine hormones, where a cell may make a hormone which actually affects itself.